Hi there, Dr. Sadaf Qureshi here, and today we are going to talk about cortical areas of brain. If we see this diagram, we can appreciate cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. Cerebrum is divided into cerebral cortex, that is superficial layer of cerebrum, and then we have cerebral medulla, that is the inner portion of cerebrum. Here in the diagram, the colored area is cerebral cortex. If we see the cerebral cortex, we can see the area or the surface of cerebral cortex is divided into different parts by different sulci. The important sulci that divides the cerebral cortex into lobes is central sulcus, lateral sulcus, parieto-occipital sulcus, and pre-occipital notch. And these sulci divide the cerebral cortex into frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. So, starting the concept of cortical areas of brain, we first need to understand what is the cortical areas of brain. Cortical areas are areas of brain located in the cerebral cortex, which refers to a superficial part of brain and it contains gray matter. These areas are classified on the basis of function as different part of cortical regions of cerebrum perform different function or are related to different functions. So that's actually the functional classification of cerebrum or cerebral cortex. If we see this diagram, we can appreciate central sulcus here, lateral sulcus here, parieto-occipital sulcus here, and pre-occipital notch here. The lobe between central sulcus and lateral sulcus is frontal lobe. The lobe between central sulcus and parieto-occipital sulcus is parietal lobe, and the lobe between parieto-occipital sulcus and pre-occipital notch is occipital lobe, and the lobe between lateral sulcus and parieto-occipital sulcus, and that is below the parietal lobe, is temporal lobe, and it is located at the temporal region of the skull. So basically these lobes are the structural main classification of the cerebral cortex. Now we will divide these lobes into different functional classification that are basically called as cortical areas of cerebrum. So first we will start with the cortical areas in frontal lobe. So what are the cortical areas in frontal lobe, or what are the functional classification of frontal lobe? We have primary motor cortex region, then we have motor association cortex, and then we have frontal eye field, then we have prefrontal cortex, and then we have a Broca's area. So these are the five functional classification or cortical region that are present in the frontal lobe of cerebral cortex. Talking about them one by one, we have first primary motor cortex that is located just anterior to the central sulcus, and the main function is associated with voluntary movement. This area controls the voluntary movement but of the contralateral side of the body. The next functional area of the frontal lobe is motor association cortex that is located just anterior to the primary motor cortex. It consists of two areas, premotor cortex and supplementary motor cortex. Premotor cortex is involved in planning, sequencing, and execution of voluntary movement, while supplementary motor cortex is performs supplementation of all of these functions. Then the third cortical area of the frontal lobe of cerebrum is frontal eye field. This area is involved in voluntary eye movement. The fourth cortical area of frontal lobe of cerebrum is prefrontal cortex. It is located on the interior aspect of frontal lobe of cerebral cortex, and this area is involved in memory, learning, behavior and personality, and judgment and decision making. It also helps in motor planning. The fifth area of frontal lobe of cerebral cortex is Broca's areas, that is located anterior inferior aspect of frontal lobe just behind premotor cortex. This area controls the muscles that are involved in speech production. In right-handed people, left side is dominant, and in left-handed people, right side is dominant, as it controls the contralateral side of the body. So these were the five cortical areas that were in the frontal lobes of cerebrum: the primary motor cortex, motor association cortex, frontal eye field, prefrontal cortex, and Broca's areas. Then we will talk about cortical areas that are present in parietal lobe. So the cortical areas that are present in parietal lobe are primary somatosensory cortex, somatosensory association cortex, and then we have is posterior association cortex. Now let's talk about them one by one. First is primary somatosensory cortex. That is located just behind the central sulcus at the postcentral gyrus, and it is primarily involved in awareness of somatic sensation. The second area in the parietal lobe or second cortical area in the parietal lobe is somatosensory association cortex that is located behind primary somatosensory cortex, and it works to analyze somatic sensation, recognition of somatic sensation. And the third area we have in parietal lobe is posterior association cortex that is also called as multimotor association area. All the sensory information from all the area come here for integration, like a sensation from visual cortex, sensation from auditory cortex, and sensation from somatosensory cortex. All the sensations come to this area and coordinate with each other in this area, that is posterior association cortex, and that is located at the parietal lobe of cerebrum. Now let's revise that. The parietal lobe that contain primary somatosensory cortex. It also has somatosensory association cortex and posterior association cortex. Now let's talk about the cortical areas that are present in temporal lobe. This is temporal lobe shown in green color. The cortical area present there are primary auditory cortex, auditory association cortex, Wernicke's areas, and primary olfactory cortex. Now let's talk about them one by one and their function. First we have is primary auditory cortex that is located at anterior aspect of temporal lobe, and it is involved in perception of sound like conscious awareness of sound, frequency of sound, pitch of sound, and location of sound. Then we have is auditory association cortex that is located just beneath the primary auditory cortex, and it is involved in analyzing the sound and recognizing the sound. And the next cortical area we have in temporal lobe is Wernicke's areas that is located at the cerebrum part that is just above the cerebellum, and it is most of the part is located medially just below the corpus callosum. It also has small area that is called as associative olfactory cortex. Primary olfactory cortex is associated with awareness of sense of smell, while associative olfactory cortex is associated with analysis and comparison of sense of smell that we have previously in memory. Then the other area, the cortical area in the temporal region is primary olfactory cortex that is located around the margin area of lateral sulcus, and it is involved in spoken language comprehension and written language comprehension. So the cortical areas in the temporal region were primary auditory cortex, auditory association cortex, Wernicke's areas, and primary olfactory cortex. Now let's talk about cortical areas in the occipital lobe. The red color in the diagram, the red part of the diagram or the cerebral cortex is occipital lobe. It has a primary olfactory cortex and olfactory association cortex. So let's talk about them one by one. The first cortical region of occipital lobe is primary olfactory cortex that is located at most posterior location of cerebral cortex and involved in conscious awareness of visual sensation. Then the second cortical area is olfactory association cortex that is located in front of primary visual cortex and behind the occipitoparietal sulcus. Its function is to analyze visual sensation, recognize visual sensation, and comparison of visual sensation. So let's revise the cortical areas of occipital lobe that are primary olfactory cortex and olfactory association cortex. So this was all about all the functional classification of these lobe or the cortical region of these lobe. Now we will just revise all of them. First we will start with the cortical areas of frontal lobe that are primary motor cortex, motor association cortex. The third area we have is frontal eye field. Fourth area we have is prefrontal cortex, and fifth area we have is Broca's areas. Now let's talk about the cortical areas of parietal lobe that are primary somatosensory cortex, somatosensory association cortex, and posterior association cortex or multimotor cortex. Then the cortical areas in the temporal lobe are primary auditory cortex, auditory association cortex, primary olfactory cortex, and Wernicke's cortex or Wernicke's areas. Then the cortical areas in the occipital lobe are visual association cortex and primary visual cortex. So these were all about the areas of the cortical regions or the functional classification of cerebral cortex. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment.